thank you very much for engaging really actively in the workshops. We really appreciate it. What we'd like to do now is for the workshop conveners to give 5 minutes overview in terms of the key emerging themes which came out from the workshop. So who would like to start first? Who would like to start? Wonderful, Nicola. Yeah.
So our workshop was looking at religion and particularly the role of the church. So we talked about different dimensions of this problem of the way that far right threatens communities, socioeconomic, political, spiritual, and the area of community relations. And we agreed that there's an important role for the church across all of those areas. We are seeing some really strong examples of good practice, some really courageous leadership that we can be learning from, but much more work that we need to be doing. So first of all, much clearer public leadership and taking of responsibility by the church, and in doing so to contribute to awareness raising around the problem and calling people to collective responsibility. Confidence building, recognizing that there are a lot of barriers to people speaking up. It's much riskier. We talked about the online hate. We talked about the threats to people's physical safety. But also, as we heard this morning, that these are issues that we haven't been talking about enough in the church. So people need to be both challenged and supported with resources saying, here's how you could speak about these issues. And part of that has to be a self-critical reflection by the church, because we felt there's a danger that we just uncritically slip into a posture of the church is above all of this and we're telling society how to fix itself. That we can, through our being intentional about addressing these issues in our preaching and all aspects of outreach, challenging narrow responses to the question of who is my neighbour, and we prioritised interfaith relations as part of that. Having the courage to be present where people are hurting, thinking strategically about how we're getting ourselves and our message out beyond the walls of the church, having the courage to hang in there on social media, even when we know that sometimes these are very dark spaces, but with the appropriate safeguards and protections for people. Thinking about how we could help facilitate dialogue in communities. Priority groups that we needed to engage were political leaders, as we heard earlier, educators across all areas, and particularly young people who are very often feeling forgotten, left out, talked down to, and doing so from a foundation of listening to those we disagree with, using the experience the church has in hospitality and fellowship to bring down the barriers, meet people where they are, and understand the issues that are getting in the way of their sense of belonging.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that, Nicola. That's really helpful. Who would like to go next? Charles and Alyssa again? If I go there, I might fall, and I don't want to fall. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll keep this brief. There was a general... our question was around... what are the key factors driving the rise of far-right extremism in relation to race in recent years? And then we had some sub-questions that focused on sort of education and how can we sort of encourage government to, to promote cohesiveness and so on and so forth. But there was quite, the both groups were determined to take the conversation precisely where they wanted to take it, and that was a great thing, yeah? But there was a general view that the church needs to be much more muscular in terms of its response to this phenomenon and this rise of the far right. And I should say actually on that point that there was also an acknowledgement that this is nothing new, that the far right have always been marching. Pretty much social media and has amplified matters. There is a need to look at we talked about economics on the question of what can we learn from other movements around the world. And so two examples were, one was the civil rights movement, the bus boycotts and things of that nature, and the anti-apartheid movement. And the question really was around, that I pose, who do we actually spend our money with? Yeah. And that sparked quite a discussion about self-determination and the things that we can do for ourselves as a community to strengthen our community and strengthen cohesion. There was a question around the issue of whiteness. We had a little bit of a discussion in the first workshop, but we never really explored that into any great depth. But I did overhear, actually, over lunch, some conversation on that matter. So I think that was a good thing. So yeah, a really, really lively discussion. Not exactly bottomed precisely what is to be done, but certainly there was a view that something different, something more radical needs to happen within the church community if we're going to address these issues effectively. I don't know if you have anything to add, Lucy.
Said everything, kind of. Said everything. Muscular Christianity. So that's one of the points. I mean, keep coming up. Oh, sorry. So vascular Christianity was, continuously mentioned. An investment in organizations that are in alignment with our ideological standpoint as well. So as similar to what happened in the apartheid era, and perhaps somebody said something about a similar organization, Pentecostal bank, established in the 70s, perhaps being rejuvenated today. So that's also part of the future solution to this. Thank you.
I should mention actually a point that was raised by a young gentleman who was in our group around the imagery. And he mentioned the use of images of Jesus being portrayed as white, and that really I think most people in the group felt that issue is not something that we can throw to one side, actually, because it speaks to the issue of how we see ourselves as a people, and I think that is something that deserves much more attention, actually, than it has up until now, should we say.
Just before Dr. Nadia and Nusrat speak, just to say that Simon Israel unfortunately had to leave, and Simon obviously led the one of the workshops. Just to say that this is very much about hearing from you. So I want you to literally, put on your proverbial thinking caps in terms of what questions you would want to put to this esteemed panel. So just think about that now. Over to you.
Just one last point about education. Somebody mentioned something on curriculum that's supposed to reflect the demographic of the people. The EDI should be strengthened, shouldn't be quashed, as been propagated in the United States.
Okay, thanks for that, Olusegun. Thank you. Thank you very much to all our contributors. So Nusrat and I did the workshop on, I have to read it again, Policing the Summer Riots of 2024. And it was a very interesting discussion. We had 2 workshops, and it was interesting in terms of the people who we had on the workshops. 2 of them were police officers serving police officers, one who works in, counterterrorism? Yep. And the other, I think she works in neighbourhood policing, if I've got that wrong, I'm not sure. But what was interesting is in terms of the discourse around the way in which the riots spread, the time in which this riot spread, but also in terms of the police response, which we believed as a group that wasn't actually, it wasn't helpful, and it actually probably exacerbated the issues which were already there. But what we did within the group as well, we discussed the antecedents to the riots. So the year before, in terms of the rhetoric, the political rhetoric by politicians, some of them in terms of existing political parties, and some of those in terms of the far right, etc., in terms of those discussions, those debates were not stopped or pulled back from. And I think that a number of us in the group raised concerns about the impact of that. The other thing which was quite glaring from the discussion that we had is about the charges in terms of the riots, in terms of the lateness, in terms of from a disturbance to a riot, took time to come together. The second part is about whether the charge of terrorism should have been an appropriate one instead of riot, given that the nature of what we saw was about people trying to push a particular ideology which falls within the definition of terrorism. Was there anything else? If anyone else from the groups wants to speak about what was there, I'm happy to that. But I think that we had a really engaging speech. And I think for us, it was about maybe for faith communities and other communities affected to engage more effectively and actively with police in their neighbourhoods. And we heard from two members of our groups from the first and second panel who'd said that the police were actively engaging with them, but we didn't see a consistency in it. And that's from my,
Yeah, excellent, wonderful. Yeah, good.
So what I want to try and do now is take questions from the floor. However, if you see this little QR code at the back, on that PowerPoint, you can see it on the second page, actually on page number 2, of your conference program. Can you please put your mobile phone onto, I don't know how these things work, put your mobile phone onto that, because we want to see how we did today. We want your feedback. Your feedback will help us to learn what we did well, what we didn't do well, and what we can do well in the future. So if you could really please put your feedback together for us, it will really help us in terms of looking at how we can improve. The second point that I want to make now is, before I open the floor, is that this is the first of a series of things that we'll be doing. On the back of this conference, we will be working on a conference report, which will contain the speeches. Thank you, please, for your speeches you're going to send to me. So all the speeches that you've heard today, they will be contained in the report with some of the key findings from research that we're going to be doing on the back of it as well. And also a future event that we'll be doing, hopefully with the wonderful Professor Anthony Reddy as well.
Don't look at me.
Yeah,
I'm not him. I'm not him.
We've got that one in the back, So because we believe that this is an ongoing conversation. This is the start, in terms of the University of East London, it's about how we work in collaboration with that, let me get it right, with the Racial Justice Advocacy Forum. I always get it wrong. And it's part about how we work together, but how we work with communities together in terms of dealing with the issues that were set. And I know that I, for one, am going to have lots of conversations with my wonderful colleague, Suresh Grover at the monitoring group, about how we can work in terms of a more effective strategy about dealing with the wider issues with a number of people. On that note, can we open up the floor? Does anyone have any questions for our panel? We've got Maria and we've got Helen. We've got Nicola from CITB. Is that right? I saw like
CTBI.
CTBI. We've got Wale. Have a look at these things. We've got Wale, we've got Charles Pritchlow, Alusigan, and the wonderful Nusrat Mahtab. Questions? Who do we want to? That is true. That's true. Any questions? Do I have to go down that way?
No, we've got Matt. Yeah, we got it. Yeah.
First question.
Thank you. And just to say, great to have so many really, really good conversations and discussions at this event today. But my question is this. Let's fast forward to February 2026. If you look backwards from this event until then, what one thing would you have liked us to have achieved?
Who wants to go first? Panel? I can tell you one thing I want, but I'll do it at the end. No.
I think, our relationship between UEL and the various church organizations, this is kind of our first dabble, if you like, into doing something together. And I think by next year, I'd like to see that relationship have flourished into something more productive, by way of actually having an impact even on our students at the university, and actually bringing us even more out into the community as a university, because I don't think that we do a great job as a university to open up our space and to encourage dialogue and the type of exchanges that we're getting today. So by February next year, I would like to see this become more normal, if you like, and that's what myself and Dr. Habashi, that's really what we're trying to do, to open up our space, because we don't know everything, and we I guess in some ways in academia is kind of a little bit of a privileged position in a way, yeah. And but I think there's too many of us that I think the term that people use nowadays is gatekeep, yeah. And I'd like to break that down much more, and open up the space for much more dialogue and more working together on projects and things that are useful actually to our community and to challenge some of the issues that we've been discussing in the event.
It's wonderful.
About 10 things here.
To answer your question, I think one of the things that would be good to give serious consideration to from a RJAF perspective concerns some sort of campaign and listening and kind of reflecting to what a lot of people have been articulating today. I'm kind of getting the distinct impression, and obviously this is something that we need to discuss collectively, that something robust and muscular needs to be implemented, whereby we engage in expressions of protestation and advocacy that are tangible and concrete and radical and make a substantive difference. Now, clearly, February next year is not that far away, but I think we can begin to give some serious thought to it.
Anyone else?
I will just add to what the colleagues have just said. I would like to see a policy change in regard to some of the topic that we've covered today. If there's no link between all the between this theoretical aspect that you did today into practice, into reality, then it's just a talking shop. So we rather have something impactful in the society from, for example, today's conference, and by this time next year, or perhaps in February, people can come back and say, yes, today was a benchmark, was a landmark to, or a precursor to something impactful change that reflect impactful change into people's life. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alyssa again. Helen?
Is this a kind of like Father Christmas thing that I can ask for whatever I like? Correct. Then in that case, I'm gonna hope that this time next year the mainstream denominations in this country will have committed to funding, let's say, 100 youth workers to work in areas of significant pressure around the country, to work for community cohesion.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And mobilising volunteers alongside them.
Excellent. Do you want to add anything, Helen?
I'm going to ask for something slightly less. I would like to see some kind of reform to the education system, so that the incident that you told us about this morning, where young black children were drawing pictures of slave chains, won't happen again. And I think that the churches have a role to play in developing some kind of program around that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Nicola?
I'll just pick up something else from the workshop, which was we talked about the limitations of responses from the church that are reactive. So the language has been set by others, the parameters have been drawn by others. So I would like to see this time next year a much greater range of examples of proactive and creative engagement by the church in this theme.
Wonderful. Nusrat?
No, I think everything's been covered. I haven't really got anything on my Christmas wish list, so...
And because I'm greedy, I always have something. So my first thing, this time next year, actually, a number of things. On the first one is, let me write me up this. No, I can't. I'm greedy, I said. The first one is on the 7th of March. We bring in the United Nations Vice Chair of the Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination over to London, over to the university, and we're doing a session with them at the House of Parliament, in House of Commons, about how we can actively work on pushing issues like this forward. That's the first thing that we're doing. The second what we're doing is we're bringing that said wonderful Vice Chair of the United Nations back again the next day on the Saturday to the university to speak about how we can work on, and I talked about it this morning in my speech, about how we can do a campaign around Article 14, which is about giving people the right to go directly to the United Nations to campaign for issues around race where they've been the victims of discrimination. That's 2. And the third, I want to strengthen our working relationship with a racial justice advocacy forum, hopefully within the next few weeks to have a memorandum of understanding. That's my greed. Yeah. Next question.
You mentioned Article 14, and Wallace said that in terms of his wish list, that next year that we have some kind of campaign. And I think the issue around Article 14 is even more critical given the issues in the United States, what's happening in terms of the far right in Europe and in this country. So I would hope that RJAF, but the churches in general, could get behind a campaign to actually push our government to sign up to the declaration of Article 14.
Yep. And we start that conversation at the Parliament event that we're doing on the 7th of March, which we'll invite yourselves to. Yep. Next question. Anyone else? Questions from the floor? Everyone's quiet. Gentleman over there. Thank you. And then lady in with the nice floral pattern.
Yeah,
Jacket.
Thank you for the whole event today. And it's not so much a question; it's just a suggestion that I know there's churches together and as an ongoing organization, but with those of us who have been here today and have met each other at workshops and in over lunch and coffee and so on, if it's possible, with people's consent, obviously, to have a ongoing discussion through a network. So if people are prepared to give their consent to sharing their emails, and then you can just establish links between churches, especially if you are from churches locally in London or elsewhere in the country. Just if you could look at that.
That's a very good point. I think one of the easiest things to do would be to either look at the Racial Justice Advocacy Forum's website or look at the Churches Together in Britain and Ireland's website. As my colleague Nadia said, there will be a report emanating from this conference, but also you've noticed there's this has been filmed as well. So what we will try and do is to use excerpts from the footage from today, and that will be on our website as well. But just as we always say, just please stay in touch. One of the things we value is this sense of being a part of a network, keeping people engaged, but also abreast of, the events that are taking place. So we always say, I think the last word we say in the booklet is stay in touch. And I think, that's our watchword, please stay in touch. As Nadia has said, this isn't the sort of the one and only event. This is something that we will continue. It's a conversation that I think we have to continue. Just picking up on Stephanie's point, I don't want to hog the microphone, but trouble is sometimes when I get in front of issues, it's hard to get me away from it. One of the things you've said, one of the things we want to see, one of the things I don't want to see is a repeat of what happened last year, in terms of the riots. Just don't want to see that. But I've got a feeling that it may happen again. I just got a sense of being in my water that it may happen again. And just to pick up on something that Nicola has said, if it does happen, it would be good if the churches are more proactive, more intentional in terms of being there, being, a voice of calm, a voice of reason, sort of speaking prophetically into that particular situation, but also standing alongside those of other faiths and none. And that's I think the importance of what we're seeking to do here, sort of building that coalition. You've heard Lord Woolley and Lord Boateng say that this afternoon, but it's that sense of us standing together, working together, that hopefully will make the difference this year if it happens. Which I didn't see too much evidence of last year. So I'll leave it there.
And next question from the lady. Yep, Floral.
Just want to say thank you very much for this most inspiring conference. And I am inspired. And I feel that, yes, we are going to move forward. But during the day, one particular thought kept haunting me, and I thought I should mention it. A young man, and I did mention it in one of our workshops, a young man, 14 years, was murdered. And his mother was being interviewed on the television. And she said since her son was 6 years old, he was haunted by the gang leaders. She said painfully, I knew this day would come. And I reflected and I thought, this young single mother lives in an area that has lots of churches. She's part of our community. And I wonder, how are we as a church connecting? The young mother said, I felt I had no one to talk to and nowhere to go. And this idea that her son was 6 years old and was being haunted and eventually killed at 14, and yet the church was there. What are we missing and what are we failing? And I think I would appeal to everyone on the panel, let's really find ways of reaching the people in our community. Let's find ways and let them know we are here. You're part of our village. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we want anyone from the panel to answer the question? Maybe Wally? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think that, yeah, and then you.
Yeah.
Thank you for what you shared. It's very difficult to know how to reflect, explore the issue that you've raised. I mean, I think the majority of us have heard that particular story and other similar stories. I'm a pastor of a church in Cowley, and there's a church across the road from our church where the pastor is invariably silent. The doors are knocked in the church every day, apart from a Sunday, because obviously that's when the people gather. But the church does not participate in community life whatsoever, doesn't even contemplate serving the community. And there are many churches around like that. And really all I can say as a pastor is it's incredibly regrettable. And we have to do something very, very different. We really do.
Rich says. Yeah, I'll be very brief, honestly. Just to say, I see Pat taking the microphone there, and Pat White, if you just raise your hand, and myself and Bishop Rosemary are part of the Synergy Network. And the Synergy Network is I would like to describe it as a growing network of churches that are committed to tackling violence against young people. Basically, it's a sort of a scenario that the sister mentioned at the back just now. And one of the things we are encouraging churches and parachurch organizations and Christians to do this year is we call it our One Pledge, One Change campaign. This idea that what one thing could you do to make a difference in a young person's life? And we heard a lot about mentoring this afternoon, and that could be one thing. The other one thing could be, and that speaks to what Reverend Wally just said now, is churches could be opened, or they should be opened. If you ask me, the between 4 and 7 on an evening, the churches should be a safe space for our young people, because that's when you tend to see, sadly, a lot of young people getting engaged, for want of a better word, in that particular activity. And the other thing we're doing, we have what we would call our Standing Together weekend, which is either the 19th or the 20th of July. And we choose that particular day because that's in England anyway. That's the weekend before schools break up for the summer holiday. And there is a correlation between schools breaking up and increased incidences of serious youth violence. And again, we're calling on churches to basically redouble their efforts. Churches are, I think the brother there from the New Testament Church of God mentioned the assets that churches have in terms of individuals who are very capable, buildings, youth workers, and Dr. Helen mentioned youth workers, and we need to see more youth workers. Particularly from the church, who are doing detached work. So they're not just about discipleship, but it's about getting out into the communities where they can make a difference. So what we're saying is, it's about standing together. It's about churches standing together. For me, it's a safeguarding issue. Now, I know you'll be talking about this on Tuesday within the Church of England, but it's a safeguarding issue. How can we keep our young people safe? I always say, we want our young people to be the next generation of lawyers, doctors, teachers, and dare I say, preachers. What we don't want is for them to either be in prison or to be in cemeteries. So it's incumbent on us as Christians, as church folk, to make a difference in the lives of our young people, to invest in them. And to me, when I think of this issue, it's a life and death issue. Sometimes as churches, we talk a lot of theology about this and that, but this is a life and death issue.
Thank you for that, Richard. Bevan wants it, and then the lady with the microphone. And then...
Can I just go in before Devon? Just to say what Richard has indicated is what I was going to share. The only thing I needed to just reiterate is the point about the churches and youth work. Clearly, we've all recognised the time within which young people being on the street is so serious in terms of them getting involved in youth crime. And we have churches where we all recognise are locked up. I mean, the buildings are closed. But with support, clearly recognising that the church has a role to play in the safety of young people after school. And we would love to see resources put back into services for young people. And given the history of youth work, which began within churches, and with the demise of youth services by the local authority, we can only but say that perhaps history is going to repeat itself, where the churches are going to be the forerunners for youth work again. So just reiterating the point that the Synergy Network is important, and we need to see more churches and other groups involved in organisational work like that as a means of combating youth and serious youth violence, particularly in relation to knife crime.
Thank you very much, Bevan. And that's, I think, and is there a question after Bevan, or is that just we can wrap up? Yeah, Evan.
Yeah, just to say, it's just picking up on this issue that many of our churches, we say that we're justice seeking, and we talk about, being there in solidarity with the marginalised. But sometimes the very issues under our nose, such as the marginalisation of our young people, whether through education or violence, we fail to pick that up. And RJF has started to look at some of this, but one of the key things, we spoke about education this morning, and I think there is an opportunity, as was said, for all of our churches to open up our spaces to be able to have those conversations. And when a young person, unfortunately, is killed in our communities, is murdered in our communities, there is fear amongst families and young people. There's an opportunity for all of our churches to show leadership and to open up and to invite the local authority, the local police and others, so that we don't give opportunity for disinformation that happened back in the summer riots, that we open our spaces locally so that we hear the truth and we can come together in solidarity to support our local families and young people. And I think there is a real opportunity to do that, because if there's one thing that the church has, it's property and accommodation. So we should be able to come together to start to do that.